Shock move. Trump seals $1.5 TU deal in just 1 hour. Carney's months of talks yendi empty-handed. In a stunning twist that has sent shockwaves through international markets and policy circles, U.S. President Donald Trump secured a historic $1.5 trillion trade deal with the European Union in just a single hour. The agreement, covering energy, defense, and investment, instantly redefined global trade dynamics. American companies now gain sweeping access to the EU. Tariffs are locked in at predictable rates, and NATO allies are newly aligned under a strong commercial umbrella. For Canada, however, this fast-paced diplomacy served as a brutal contrast. After months of ongoing negotiations, Prime Minister Mark Carney has yet to deliver even a preliminary deal, leaving Canadians increasingly anxious as a major tariff deadline rapidly approaches. Trump's deal is not just big, it's transformative. It includes $750 billion in energy purchases, $600 billion in direct investments from the EU into American infrastructure, and $150 billion in defense procurement, making it the most significant trade pact signed by the U.S. in years. What's most remarkable is the speed and clarity of the outcome. This was not some vague memorandum or political handshake. The terms are enforceable, timelines are set, and both sides have clear incentives. By contrast, Carney's negotiation process has dragged on with no tangible results, prompting concern from Canadian exporters, businesses, and everyday consumers bracing for higher prices. What makes this outcome so alarming for Canadians is that Carney wasn't caught off guard. Since winning the Liberal leadership and becoming Prime Minister following the April snap election, Carney emphasized restoring Canada's international standing and forging trade ties with key partners. Yet despite being in office for months and publicly prioritizing trade talks with both the U.S. and EU, his government has failed to lock down a single binding agreement. Instead, the Carney administration has become bogged down by internal debates, rigid policies like Canada's supply management protections, and hesitance to make necessary compromises. The urgency is very real. On August 1st, the United States is set to impose sweeping 35% tariffs on key Canadian exports if a bilateral deal isn't reached. This includes aluminum, steel, lumber, machinery, and even agricultural products. For many Canadian businesses already navigating inflation, rising interest rates, and global instability, these tariffs would be devastating. Jobs are at risk, prices will rise, and investors may start pulling out. Despite public reassurances from the Carney government that negotiations are in a final, intense phase, the lack of results so far paints a worrying picture. Time is running out, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Critics from across the political spectrum are now asking whether Mark Carney's leadership is more style than substance. He presents a polished image, an experienced central banker turned statesman, but there's growing frustration over a lack of real-world results. While he's often praised in elite circles for his climate rhetoric and financial expertise, those qualities mean little to the manufacturer in Ontario or the grain farmer in Saskatchewan facing uncertainty about export markets. His focus on long-term policy goals like carbon pricing and digital regulation has done little to ease short-term economic pain or secure new trade avenues. Meanwhile, the Canadian economy is showing clear signs of vulnerability. Top professionals, engineers, doctors, software developers, are increasingly relocating to the United States for higher pay and more opportunities. The so-called brain drain, once dismissed as a myth, is becoming a harsh reality. Canada is also losing ground in innovation, competitiveness, and global investment. While the U.S. now enjoys new capital inflows thanks to Trump's aggressive deal-making, Canada's growth remains sluggish and unprotected from looming external shocks. Inaction isn't just a policy failure, it's starting to look like a national liability. Carney's defenders point to his credentials. After all, he led both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, and few can question his economic literacy. But leadership isn't about resumes. It's about performance. And as it stands, Carney has not produced the outcomes Canadians expected when they elected him. Voters were promised stability, competence, and a reassertion of Canada's global voice. Instead, they've gotten stalled negotiations, rising costs, and the unsettling reality of watching allies strike deals without us. For a government that campaigned on re-engagement with the world, this moment feels like a missed opportunity. Making matters worse is the optics. Trump stood at the podium with European leaders, beaming as the deal was signed, symbolizing strength and momentum. Carney, by contrast, remains locked in behind-the-scenes talks with no public wins to show. And with Trump signaling that countries not willing to meet his terms will simply face tariffs, Canada's lack of leverage becomes painfully clear. The reality is that we're dealing with a different world now, one where speed, flexibility, and boldness are rewarded. Canada's wait-and-see diplomacy just doesn't cut it anymore. At home, Canadians are also questioning the fairness and logic of their current trade framework. While buying a $300 backpack from the U.S. could cost a Canadian up to $700 after duties and taxes, goods from overseas, especially from authoritarian regimes, often face lower or no tariffs. It's not just inefficient. It's demoralizing. Ordinary citizens feel squeezed at every turn, while the government seems more interested in preserving old policies than modernizing trade to benefit everyday people. This inconsistency fuels resentment and weakens public trust in economic leadership. With less than 48 hours before the U.S. deadline, the pressure on Carney couldn't be more intense. If no deal is signed and tariffs kick in, the consequences will be swift and severe. Exporters may be forced to cut jobs. Small businesses could fold. Consumers will face higher prices on goods ranging from appliances to groceries. And worst of all, Canada could lose credibility as a reliable trade partner. Other countries may begin negotiating around us, assuming we are too slow or too divided to be worth the effort. That kind of isolation is not just embarrassing, it's dangerous for a country so dependent on trade. Some still hold out hope that Carney will pull off a last-minute deal. He's known to be deliberate and thoughtful, and his supporters argue that rushing negotiations just to meet artificial deadlines could result in poor long-term outcomes. But in today's world, long-term success increasingly depends on short-term execution. Trump's ability to strike a $1.5 trillion deal in 1 hour proves that decisive leadership can reshape the global order. Waiting months without delivering results doesn't inspire confidence, it invites marginalization. At this pivotal moment, Canadians must ask, do we have a government ready to defend our interests, or one stuck in outdated diplomacy? The Trump-EU deal sets a global standard. Canada must act or risk being left behind in a fast-moving world. Polished speeches aren't enough. We need bold, effective leadership that delivers real results. The time for talk is over. It's time for action.